Welcome to Empower Wyandotte. I'm your host, Jessica Schmidtberger, a third-year doctoral occupational therapy student at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas. In this space, we jump into meaningful conversations about the systems around us and what's affecting health in our community, so we can step more confidently into conversations and action in our own communities. Today, we have Katie Wiegand, a community resource navigator at Crosslines Community Outreach, an organization serving people affected by poverty in Kansas City, Kansas, on the podcast. Katie is a master of social work, and she brings light to the processes that individuals and families work through as they navigate the nonprofit and government benefit world, specifically in relation to the documents people need in order to qualify and participate in programs like these. She helps us gain perspective through specific client encounters and encourages us to have grace as people work through complicated processes. At the end of this episode, I will provide some resources and information that connects this discussion with evidence so we can all move forward from this conversation confident in what we learned. Thanks for being here, and here's Katie. As a resource navigator in the community, you are primarily focusing on documentation, social security card, state ID, birth certificate. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of having these documents, what this means for your clients? Also, preface, you're working with folks experiencing homelessness, experiencing poverty, maybe who don't have access to those documents, right?
Yeah, of course. So there are a lot of different things that require all of the documents. So if you are
like all those three documents?
All three documents, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of times if we show our ID, that's valid enough for us to get, like if we're getting alcohol or tobacco or whatever at the store, or we're just validating, hey, this is me, I need to pick my car, like that kind of stuff. We're validating ourselves.
I need to get cash out of my bank account. Here's my ID. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so for welfare programs, so like government programs that specifically like state funded, like SNAP or food stamps, or Medicaid, or even HUD housing.
Housing and urban development housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And so there's certain requirements for that, and it requires all of those documents. You can't just use an ID. You can't just use your birth certificate. You need all three of those documents
in order to prove who you are over and over and over again.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And so I think a lot of that has been with preventing fraud that happens in those systems. Even though there's not a lot that happens, there's always this idea and the stigma of, oh, you're in welfare? You're definitely selling your food stamps. Oh, you're doing this. Sure. Oh, you're doing that. And so this is, I think it's kind of a fraud deterrent maybe, but anyway, I don't have any say over it. It's a bureaucratic system. It's very much like, this is what the paperwork says, this is what we have to do. And
sure.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of these systems that require these documents. And so if someone is homeless, they lose their ID, that burns up in a fire, it gets lost, someone takes their backpack, something like that.
Sure. Which these things sound really out there, right? To a person maybe who's listening, but when you are, living outside and it's cold outside, you're going to have a fire going all the time to stay warm. And that can get out of hand very quickly. If there's a wind gust, if there's anything going on in your camp that's not something that you're used to, right? And there's also moments where you're hopefully getting some rest, where you're sleeping, where you're not paying attention to 100% to your surroundings. And like things can get stolen very easily. So those things that maybe sound out of left field happen very frequently.
Right, exactly. And so there's a lot of times where like you and I have ID, we don't usually also carry our social and our birth certificate. Correct. But if you're carrying everything,
or know where it is at, honestly, half the time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's in that safe pocket or in that safe folder at home or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you are carrying everything that you own and it's all in a backpack or it's all in your wallet, and that gets lost or stolen, now you have no documents to prove who you are. And so that's where we come in, is navigating what documents can we find? Can we figure out if we can use a medical record, if we can use an old title loan, if we can use something, like if there's different things that we can use to validate who you are as a person, to prove and get documents and start that process.
Sure, to prove who you are. So where do you kind of start to go about that process, getting documents so that people can get access to these different resources that you're talking about, which include income, food access, housing access, right? All these different areas of life that we naturally a lot of times have access to and assume access to that people may not have access to because of the lack of documents that they have.
Yeah. So it's definitely a little bit of a game almost. Like it's, okay, well, you don't have your social. So what do we need? Your social? We need your ID or your birth certificate. We need to get one of those. Birth certificates seem to have a lot more, not leniency, but they have a lot more options of what you can submit as proof.
Okay,
so it's like, yeah. And so like state of Kansas has different documents requirements than like Oklahoma or Iowa or wherever someone might be born.
Sure.
And so looking into what is required, sometimes it's one copy of a photo ID.
Okay.
But then they also have list B that you can use two different documents from that list. So maybe it's a medical record, and if you were recently released from jail, like maybe there's a jail record that has your picture on it, and you can use those two.
Sure.
things.
A Medicaid card is one that we used in a case that we were working on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. A lot of things with like state services is like valid for getting state things. So like your birth certificate.
Because you initially had to have all of those documents to prove
yes,
that you
exactly.
can get those services. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. If you have like a letter from SNAP or a letter from Medicaid or something like that is also a valid part for getting that birth certificate. And then with the birth certificate, we can get your social security card, and with those two things, we can get a state ID. So it's kind of figuring out which step goes first.
Sure.
And it's kind of a little bit of a game of sometimes it can feel like a spiral, and that's what I tell clients.
I feel like a lot of times too, I mean, even from my own personal experience, right? People are like, you need to know where your social security card's at. You need to know where your birth certificate's at, even if it is like at home in my parents' safe. And just thinking, man, I'm so scared to lose those things.
Yeah.
But now seeing there are actually so many different like loopholes or things that you can kind of do, hoops you can jump through in order to get those documents back.
Yeah.
If you know the right people, if you're able to access the right resources.
Yes.
So can you think of a specific example maybe of clients that you've walked through this whole process with and that or that you're walking through this process with?
Yeah.
And what that looks like for them?
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of different ways that this can come up. And like I've said, like it could get lost. It could be stolen. We recently had a couple that came in because they had a fire at their camp and it got out of control. They came in with their bags of stuff, and you could tell like their ID was half melted. Their birth certificate was melted to the bag. Like it was caught on fire. And so how do we navigate getting their resources back, and they're getting their IDs back from that? And so one of the issues they were having was verifying who they were for Social Security benefits. So
to get their monthly income because of whatever situation they were in.
Yeah. So they get
additional income.
Yeah, they had Social Security, so they would get monthly income and come on a card with this company that Social Security works with.
Okay.
And so the company required them to verify who they were so that they can reactivate the card because their other card got burnt up.
Sure.
So they're calling and they're like, you need to send in a copy of this and this and this.
Documentation proving who you are. Yeah.
Exactly. And so now they don't have any of that, or what they have is kind of burnt or singed or whatever.
Sure.
And so we have to navigate ordering a birth certificate again, ordering a new Social Security card, getting their ID, figuring out if they have their mailing address, and getting proof of address because they're staying in Kansas for sure, and they have for a long time.
And a lot of times, speaking into that, we'll use cross lines as a proof of address or another nonprofit location that people are going to and frequenting for the time being. So it's called a mailing address. Yeah. So, but it becomes their proof that they're living in Kansas. Sure.
So maybe they don't have an apartment, they don't have a house, they have somewhere where they're picking up their mail though.
Yes.
So for these different resources, and then also for like if they're getting their check mailed to them, or if their friend needs to send them something, or a bill from the hospital, or etc.
Sure.
So just kind of wherever their mailing address is.
Sure. So this couple working through this process with you, right? They're navigating what this all looks like.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you don't realize how much your ID helps until you don't have it.
Right.
And so when they don't have this ID, they can't prove who they are. They can't get access to their money.
Sure.
They can't pay their phone bill. And now they're disconnected from any resource that they have. And so now they have to go in person, and now they've navigated the buses, so they know how to get there, but it's just taking more time out of their day to do X, Y, and Z that they need to accomplish.
Absolutely. So what does the timeline kind of look like for all these things?
Sure.
To happen?
Yeah. So for a typical thing, it can take up to 2 months to make sure you get all of those documents.
Starting from ground zero, starting with nothing.
And
kind of going through that search of, okay, what can we use? What can we find? What holes can we jump through to get you these 3 different documents?
Yeah. And sometimes it's faster than that. Sometimes it's longer than that. A lot of times you're waiting on these mailed in applications coming back. Sometimes we mail it in and they mail it back and they're like, actually, you missed the documents. Here's the check back. Here's all the paperwork back. Send in the proper documentation.
And just a note, just a note with that, after you get all of your documents and everything, reorienting yourself to the system in a way of, getting access to Social Security income, food stamps, anything that is a government assisted program is going to take a lot of additional time as well. So with that in mind, I suppose, what does that mean for us? For me, who's a grad student, or somebody listening who's a community member, what does all this information about documentation mean for us outside of, there's all these things that you can do if you lose your Social Security card, or, we have now information on maybe some steps that we could take if that happens to us. But what does this mean for the people that we see in our community who we see experiencing all of these maybe barriers to accessing documents and resources? What does it mean for us?
Yeah. So one of the main things, and we've had a conversation about this before, is giving people the grace to figure out these problems. It's going to take a while. It could take as little as 3 weeks. It could take as much as 3 or 4 months to get all of your
after all is said and done.
And so having the grace of people are trying. People are trying. Maybe they've tried 3 or 4 times and are frustrated and need to stop and give up for a minute and then come back to it. So it's just kind of that grace of, okay, they are trying to figure this out. They're trying to work on these things. They're trying to get this stuff together. There's limited resources in our community. And so realizing, hey, why don't they have housing? Well, there's not enough low-income housing. Why don't they have ID? Well, it's a big process and they're starting it from ground zero.
It's a really long process.
Yes. And so kind of realizing that there is time that a lot of these programs take. A lot of people are on waiting lists. They're on waiting lists to get into programs. And so giving that grace of, they're working on it. They're trying. Things are going to change, but it's going to happen slowly.
Yeah.
There's a big stigma with people who are homeless. There's a big stigma of, well, you should be doing it. You should be figuring it out. These processes are very complex. And even if I would sat and explained them all, it can be very confusing, can be kind of disorienting. And so having the grace to realize that there are these processes in place and they are trying to work them, but the systems aren't meant to be worked easily.
Yeah. And just honoring the grace and dignity that each person kind of deserves and is worthy of, for sure.
Yeah.
As they're processing through probably a really hard season of their life,
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Thank you so much for all that you're doing, Katie. You're always a delight to talk to and to learn from. 11%, so 1 in 10, more than 1 in 10, voting age citizens in the US, so 18 or over, don't have unexpired identification. All that Katie talks about throughout this conversation with documentation, whether that be birth certificate, social security card, or government issued ID, has a profound impact on our health outcomes as a community. And I would love to discuss that a little bit. An example, if you don't have an ID, it's really hard to get a job. It's especially hard to get a job with benefits. On the flip side of that, if you don't have a job, it's impossible to get Medicaid or Medicare without an ID. If you don't have an ID and you do have a job, you can't get a bank account to put your money into to save for an emergency or to purchase quality food for your family because you don't have an ID. I say all of this in hopes to bring understanding and empathy to the processes that Katie was talking about. It takes time to go through getting a social security card and then getting a birth certificate or vice versa, and then getting your ID, right? She said that ID is usually the last thing that we're able to get, and that takes time. So what can we do about this? We can have conversations with friends and family about the processes that people who maybe are experiencing homelessness or joblessness or any of these societal concerns that are related to potentially not having a form of ID, a form of government ID, because it really is a process. So let's have a couple conversations about this identification process over the course of this week. And I would love to hear more on this topic because I know there are a lot of thoughts surrounding ease of access to identification. How easy should it be? How difficult should it be? And I want to continue having conversations and understanding this process better. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.